I was making pancakes that morning because, of course, my daughter loves pancakes. It's a simple ritual we have, like clockwork. Wake up, toss a few eggs in a bowl, stir, and throw them onto the griddle with a dash of cinnamon. She's always in a rush, always trying to get out the door so she won't be late for school. It's almost like she's competing in a race when she doesn't even know she's in. I get it, the morning routine is the worst for anyone, especially a teenager. They're already in a bad mood, already battling the inner turmoil of wanting to sleep in, but also trying to look cool and stylish. At least that's how I see it. I remember being a teenager, and frankly, I think my daughters got it easy. "Mom, can you hurry up with breakfast? I'm gonna be late," she yells from the living room. Typical, this kid acts like she's got an audition for the Olympics every time she needs to get somewhere on time. I chuckle under my breath and slide the pancakes onto a plate. "I'm moving as fast as I can, sweetie. You can't rush perfection," I call out, trying to keep it light. I've learned that sarcasm is the only language that works when you have a teenager. They don't want your wisdom, your advice, or your help. No, they want to pretend like they're independent, until they need you to pay for something, of course. She comes storming into the kitchen, her hair a mess, wearing the school's latest fashion crime. A hoodie with a logo the size of a billboard, ripped jeans, and shoes that look like they were stolen from a swamp. "You're seriously wearing that today?" I ask, eyeing her choice of attire. She looks at me like I've just insulted her entire existence. "You're embarrassing, Mom. Why do you care?" It's the same conversation every day. I laugh it off and hand her the pancakes. She shovels them in like she's on a time crunch, and in a way, she is. We're both running against the clock. She's trying to get out the door, and I'm just trying to survive the chaos of it all. But before she can choke down another bite, she's out the door, the sound of her sneakers slapping against the pavement echoing behind her. Another typical morning, but today was different. Now let's get one thing straight. I wasn't one of those parents who kept tabs on every little thing my kid did. I trusted her. I gave her space, maybe too much. The whole "I trust you" speech was repeated like a mantra in my house. But then again, she's always been a good kid, at least that's what I thought. So when she sent me a text during the middle of the day, I was in the middle of a call with the bank, talking about refinancing. I barely glanced at my phone, thinking she was just texting me about some random thing, like how she forgot her lunch or needed something from me. But no, this was different. It was short, it was simple, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. "Mom, I need you to come to the school, now." I sat there holding the phone in my hand, staring at the screen like I couldn't process what I was reading. What could possibly be so important? What could have gone wrong? My heart skipped a beat. Maybe I was overreacting, maybe it was nothing. Kids these days are drama queens, right? I'd heard rumors about the school bullies, the ones who think they run the place, but I didn't think my daughter had ever been involved. I texted back, trying to play it cool. "What's going on?" There was no response. The silence was deafening. I had no choice. I grabbed my keys and ran out the door, heading straight for the school, my mind racing. What if something happened? What if it was serious? I couldn't help but think of all the worst-case scenarios, the ones where my daughter was the victim of some bully who thought it was cool to pick on her. I parked in front of the school, my mind in 1,000 different places. As I walked through the front doors, I tried to keep my cool. But deep down, I could feel the anxiety building up like a storm cloud in my chest. The school receptionist barely glanced up when I told her my name. "Your daughter's in the cafeteria," she said, pointing to the left. I nodded, trying to act like I wasn't in full-on panic mode. But the moment I turned that corner into the cafeteria, I knew something was wrong. The noise of the kids laughing, chatting, and eating suddenly went silent. The room felt like it had turned into slow motion, like everyone had paused just to see what was about to happen. And there he was, the bully, the HOA guy. Let me tell you about this guy. He wasn't just some high school tough guy. No, he was worse. He was a grown man, the type who thought he could control everyone around him just because he was the president of the HOA. He had this smug look on his face like he owned the school, hell, like he owned the entire block. His name, Gary something or other, but everyone called him Big Gary. Not because he was particularly big, but because he was the kind of guy who thought his presence was big enough to make anyone else shrink in his shadow. And there he was, standing over my daughter like he was about to deliver some life lesson that no one asked for. He had a hand on her shoulder, but it wasn't the comforting kind of touch. No, it was the kind of touch that made your skin crawl. It was possessive, aggressive. Give me your lunch, he sneered at her, his voice loud enough for half the cafeteria to hear. I'm too important to eat this garbage. You don't mind, do you? My daughter just looked at him, her face pale. She didn't say anything. I could see her shaking a little bit. She wasn't the kind of girl to make a scene, and honestly, that's what terrified me the most. Gary's voice got louder. Well, I'm waiting. I couldn't stand it anymore. I'd let this go on long enough. Gary, I shouted, my voice cutting through the silence of the room like a knife. He turned, surprised at first. He didn't expect me to be the one walking in. What do you want, lady? He growled, like I was the one who had invaded his territory. I want you to get your hands off my daughter, I said, every ounce of authority in my voice. But inside, I was trembling. I couldn't let him see it. I had to be strong. Big Gary chuckled, taking a step back, clearly sizing me up. And what are you gonna do about it? I wanted to say something tough, something dramatic, but I wasn't sure what was worse, getting in his face or keeping my distance. Then with a smirk, he made a move. In one smooth, almost rehearsed motion, he shoved my daughter away from him. She stumbled, but thankfully didn't fall. But that was it. I'd had enough. I stepped forward, putting myself between them. You need to leave now. Gary laughed like I was some joke. Or what? What are you going to do, lady? My heart was pounding. My adrenaline was through the roof. But one thing was clear. I wasn't backing down. I wasn't going to let him bully my kid, not today, not ever. Or I'm going to make you regret it, I said, my voice shaking with anger but steady enough to send a clear message. Gary just scoffed and started to turn away, clearly underestimating me. But I wasn't done, not by a long shot. I wish I could say that my confrontation with Gary was the end of it, but no, of course not. This was only the beginning. Gary turned to leave, clearly thinking that I'd back down, but I wasn't having any of it. No way. I stood my ground, watching him like a hawk, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. There was no way I was letting him get away with it, not after what he'd just done to my daughter. But instead of backing off, Gary did the one thing I wasn't expecting. He turned around slowly, his smirk now twisted into something darker. He stepped closer to me, way too close, like he was sizing me up. I could practically smell his arrogance. This guy thought he was untouchable. He was the HOA president, the big man around here. Apparently, he didn't care who he pushed around as long as he could get away with it. And here I was, a regular mom, standing between him and my daughter. In his eyes, I was just another obstacle to push through. His posture was so smug, it was almost cartoonish. Listen here, lady, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. I don't have time for your little games. You should know your place. I should have seen it coming. I should have known he wouldn't just walk away quietly. But what happened next shocked me in a way I couldn't have prepared for. Before I could say anything else, Gary's hand shot out toward my daughter, this time grabbing her lunch tray right from her hands. It was like a scene straight out of a bad movie. I could see the surprise in my daughter's eyes, the confusion as she tried to hold on to it, but Gary's grip was ironclad. You're not eating this today, sweetheart, he sneered, yanking the tray away from her. That was it, my blood boiled. There was no more thinking, no more rationalizing. My only instinct was to protect my daughter, and this guy, this walking, talking billboard of entitlement, had just crossed the line. My daughter was clearly shaken, but I could see the spark of defiance starting to rise in her. I could see it in the way she straightened up, her eyes narrowing, as though she was daring him to try something else. It made me proud, but also terrified. Gary didn't care, though. He just stood there holding the tray like it was some kind of trophy. He waved it around, mocking her, taunting her. What's the matter, huh? You gonna cry now? What's it gonna be? I could feel my face turn red. He was bullying her, humiliating her in front of everyone, and no one was doing a thing about it. People were watching, some were even snickering, but nobody was stepping in. No one had the courage to stop him. I took a step forward, my voice calm but deadly. Give her the tray back, Gary. He looked down at me, sneering, and shook his head like I was a nuisance. What, you think I'm scared of you? You think just because you're some overprotective mom, I'm gonna roll over and hand it back? You don't know who you're dealing with. The nerve of this guy. My hand was still clenched into a fist, but I was doing my best to control it. I had to keep it together. I had to outsmart him. But the longer I stood there, the angrier I got. She's not your punching bag, I said through gritted teeth. And I'm not afraid of you either. Gary's eyes flashed with something cold, something I didn't like. He took a step closer, his chest almost touching mine. He was towering over me now, trying to intimidate me with his size, but the thing was, I wasn't intimidated. Not anymore. "I could make your life miserable," Gary said, his tone low and dangerous. "You don't know how many people I know in this town, lady. I can make sure you never get anything done around here again." Oh great, a power move. Classic bully tactic. I could already hear him in his HOA meetings, whining about how disrespectful the people in the neighborhood were to him and how they didn't appreciate his hard work. What a joke. But it wasn't the threat that bothered me. It was the fact that my daughter was standing there, caught in the crossfire, watching this whole thing unfold. She shouldn't have to see this. Not in school, not anywhere. Gary seemed to sense that he was winning, his grin getting wider. The satisfaction on his face was like he had already won the battle. I wasn't about to let that happen. Without thinking, I grabbed the tray from his hand. He was caught off guard for a split second, his grip loosening just enough for me to take it back. The look on his face was priceless, like he couldn't believe I had the nerve to touch it. But it wasn't just the tray I grabbed, it was my chance to turn the tables. "You want this back, Gary?" I asked, holding the tray up in front of his face. "You're going to have to earn it." Before he could say anything, I swung the tray around in the most ridiculous way possible, like I was some kind of cartoon character. The whole cafeteria went silent, and for a moment I thought I had overdone it. But no, the moment the tray came back down, it hit Gary right in the chest with a soft splat. The food on it, mostly mashed potatoes and gravy, splattered all over his shirt, dripping down onto his pants and shoes. The look on his face was worth every second of it. He stood there, completely stunned, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, trying to process what had just happened. I could hear a few kids start to laugh, a couple of them even clapping, like they were watching the world's most satisfying slow-motion crash. Gary, now covered in mashed potatoes and gravy, looked down at his ruined outfit in horror. For a second, I thought he might lose it, but he just froze. And I couldn't help it. I laughed. It was a chuckle at first, but then it built up into full-blown laughter. I couldn't contain it. "You should have thought twice before messing with my kid," I said between laughs, wiping a tear from my eye. Gary's expression was priceless. His face had turned beet red and his hands were shaking. But it wasn't the rage that scared me, it was the embarrassment. This man, who had terrorized countless people with his authority, was now reduced to a laughingstock in front of the entire cafeteria. It was delicious. Gary finally snapped out of it and wiped his hands across his face, trying to clear the mess, but it was no use. He was covered head to toe in mashed potatoes, and the more he tried to wipe it off, the worse it got. I could tell he was trying to keep his composure, trying to muster some dignity, but it was gone. "Clean yourself up, Gary," I said with a smirk. "I think you've lost this round." I turned to my daughter, who was standing there, looking at me with wide eyes. A little smile tugged at her lips. She didn't say anything, but she didn't need to. The look on her face told me everything. She was proud. And I, for the first time in what felt like forever, was proud of myself, too. Gary stood there for a few seconds longer, still wiping his shirt, but the moment was over. He realized he wasn't in control anymore. The great and powerful Gary had been brought down by a tray of mashed potatoes. He stormed out of the cafeteria without another word, the laughter from the other kids echoing in his wake. I stood there, arms crossed, with the tray still in my hands, watching him leave. For once, the bully had lost. And I couldn't have been happier. I stood there in the middle of the cafeteria, holding the now-empty lunch tray like some kind of trophy. My heart was still racing, but I had to admit it felt good, really good. The laughter and chatter around me started to pick up again, but there was something different now. It wasn't just the usual din of kids gossiping and eating. It was like everyone had been waiting for something to happen, waiting for someone to stand up to Gary and finally take him down a peg. And I had just done it. I turned to my daughter, who was still standing there, her mouth slightly open in disbelief. The smile creeping across her face was enough to make my chest swell with pride. "Are you okay?" I asked, making sure she was all right after everything that just went down. "Yeah," she said, shaking her head a little as if she couldn't quite believe what had just happened. "I can't believe you actually did that. I told you I wasn't going to let him get away with it." I grinned, trying to look casual, though inside, I was practically jumping for joy. Then, just as I was about to give her a high five for surviving that mess, I heard it. A voice deep, menacing, and all too familiar. "Hey, lady." My stomach dropped. I turned, already knowing who it was, and there he was, Gary. Except now he was even worse than before. He wasn't just mad anymore, he was humiliated. And when a guy like Gary gets humiliated, well, let's just say it doesn't go quietly. He was back, but this time there was no sneer on his face. His eyes were wide, his face flushed, and his hands were balled into fists. The mashed potatoes were still smeared across his chest and down his pants, and if I had to guess, he probably smelled like a cafeteria floor at this point. I knew this moment was coming. I knew he wasn't going to just slink off with his tail between his legs. He was far too full of himself for that, but honestly, I didn't care. What was he going to do? Yell at me? Sue me for assault with a lunch tray? I crossed my arms and stood my ground. "What's up, Gary? Need a napkin?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. Inside, I was anything but calm, but I wasn't about to show him that. Gary gritted his teeth. "You think this is over?" he spat. "No," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I think you need to get over it. I didn't start this. You did." "I was just having a little fun with your kid," he muttered, but his eyes were darting around the room now, looking for support, like someone would stand with him and make me back off. But no one moved. There was something about Gary, something that people had either ignored or feared for years. He was that guy who thought he could walk around and intimidate everyone just because he was the self-proclaimed king of the neighborhood. But here, in this cafeteria with kids laughing and watching, he was just another bully who had lost his power. "You want to play games?" I said, taking a step toward him. "I can play, but I'll warn you I'm way better at it than you are." Gary clenched his fists tighter, his face turning darker. "You think this is funny?" "No," I said, "but I think you're ridiculous." And for a split second, it felt like I had won. I could see it in his face. He was caught off guard. He didn't expect this. He didn't expect someone like me, some random mom, to stand up to him like this. And that was the best part. The shock in his eyes, the realization that he wasn't untouchable, that he couldn't just bully his way through life anymore. But he wasn't done. Oh no, Gary wasn't going to just walk away from this humiliation. He had a reputation to uphold, after all. So naturally, he did what any big shot would do when their ego is bruised. They run to authority. "Principal," he shouted, turning to the front of the cafeteria. "This woman just assaulted me. She hit me with a lunch tray. She's a danger to this school." I wanted to laugh. It was almost too easy. He was so dramatic, so over the top. He could have been auditioning for a role in a soap opera with the way he threw himself into this fake performance. But the principal, Mrs. Hayes, was already heading toward us, probably drawn in by Gary's shouting. "Great. Gary, what's going on here?" Mrs. Hayes asked, looking between the two of us, her hands clasped in front of her like she was preparing for a staff meeting. Gary pointed a shaking finger at me. "She attacked me, Mrs. Hayes. She physically assaulted me with that tray. You have to do something about this." I almost couldn't keep my face straight. The man had the audacity to make himself the victim after everything he'd done. The guy who'd been bullying my daughter, threatening her and other kids, now wanted to play the poor, mistreated soul. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, trying not to show how much his antics were starting to annoy me. "Gary, you're lying," I said, my voice calm, but with just enough bite to make him squirm. "You started this whole thing. You grabbed my daughter's lunch tray and shoved her, and then you tried to bully her. And when I stepped in, you tried to intimidate me. If anyone's been assaulted here, it's my kid." Mrs. Hayes raised an eyebrow and looked at Gary, then at me. "Is that what happened, Gary?" Gary hesitated, and in that moment I could see the cracks in his story. He was trying to figure out a way to make his version sound believable, but it wasn't working. Not with me standing there, calm as can be, and not with the eyes of the other kids on him. They had seen everything. They knew what had happened. Gary started, but he was fumbling. He couldn't even make the words come out right. "She attacked me." "I did not," I shot back, "and you know it. You're the one who made this whole thing escalate." Mrs. Hayes looked at me, then back at Gary. She folded her arms and sighed, clearly not buying his story. "Gary, I've had enough complaints about you, and I'm not going to tolerate any more drama. You need to take responsibility for your actions." For a brief second, I thought he might actually argue with her. But then, without warning, he just turned and stomped off, muttering something under his breath that I couldn't quite make out. He was defeated. The power trip he'd been riding was over. I couldn't help but smile. It felt like I had just won a battle that wasn't even mine to fight. I didn't need to throw a punch or scream. I just needed to stand up for what was right. "Are you okay?" Mrs. Hayes asked, looking at my daughter. I turned to her, seeing that her shoulders had relaxed a little. "I'm fine," she said, though I could tell she was still a bit shaken. Mrs. Hayes looked between us and sighed again. "I'll be making sure that Gary stays out of the picture for the rest of the day. You've got my word on that." I nodded. "Thanks, Mrs. Hayes, but we're good. We've got this covered." As we walked out of the cafeteria, my daughter by my side, I couldn't help but feel proud. For me, for her, for standing up when it mattered. "Thanks, Mom," she said, smiling up at me. I grinned, ruffling her hair. "No problem, you're my kid. No one messes with my kid." And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had actually done something right. Not just for me, but for her, too. I had barely gotten a moment to enjoy my victory before things started to get messy again. As the day went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was coming. Gary wasn't the type to let things go. He'd been humiliated in front of everyone, sure, but I could tell from the moment he stormed out of the cafeteria that this wasn't over. And when a guy like Gary's pride is hurt, you know trouble isn't far behind. I tried to stay focused, tried to act like it was just another day. My daughter, Lucy, and I had our afternoon routine down, homework, a snack, a quick chat about her day. It was nice, normal, like we could pretend the whole Gary thing never happened. But as I cooked dinner, I could feel that familiar weight in the pit of my stomach. I knew it wasn't over. And sure enough, around dinner time, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Mrs. Hayes, the principal. "Please come to the school. Gary's made another complaint." I read the text twice, trying to understand what was going on. Another complaint. He had already been caught in a lie today. What else could he possibly have left to accuse me of? I didn't even have to think twice. I grabbed my jacket, muttered something about mom business to Lucy, and headed out the door. When I arrived at the school, Mrs. Hayes was waiting for me in her office, her face as tight as a drum. Gary was sitting there, arms crossed, scowling like a kid caught stealing cookies from the jar. If there was one thing I hated, it was the look of someone who thought they could get away with everything. And that's exactly what Gary had on his face. He thought he was in control again. I walked in trying to keep my cool. "What's this about another complaint?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, though I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me. Mrs. Hayes gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Please, sit down. Gary has made an accusation, and I need to hear both sides of the story." Gary opened his mouth immediately, like he'd been waiting for this moment all day. "She assaulted me, Mrs. Hayes," he said, his voice dripping with fake sincerity. "Not only did she attack me with a lunch tray, but she also physically threatened me in front of students. I'm afraid for my safety. I don't feel comfortable coming back to school unless she's removed from the premises." I could feel my jaw tightening. This man, this disgrace of a human being, was sitting there, making himself out to be the victim after everything that had happened. He was trying to spin it like he was the one being harassed, like I was the one who needed to be punished. It took everything I had not to get up and start shouting. But I couldn't. I had to stay calm. I couldn't let him see me lose my temper. I'd dealt with people like him before. Big talk, no substance. "Gary," I said, taking a deep breath, "I don't know what story you're telling, but the truth is you started all of this. You bullied my daughter in the cafeteria. You grabbed her lunch tray, pushed her, and made her feel unsafe. And when I stood up to you, you tried to intimidate me." I turned to Mrs. Hayes, who had been silent until then. "You saw the whole thing. You saw who the real aggressor was. I'm not going to sit here and let him twist the facts." Mrs. Hayes didn't respond immediately. She leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowing at Gary. Then she spoke, her voice firm and no nonsense. "Gary," she said, looking at him, "I've been hearing complaints about you for weeks now. This isn't the first time. And I've seen the footage from the cafeteria security cameras. Your version of events doesn't line up with what happened." Gary's face turned red, his smugness faltering for just a second. "The footage? What footage?" "The footage from the cafeteria," Mrs. Hayes repeated, her voice calm but stern. "It shows everything, Gary. You taking the lunch tray from Lucy, you pushing her, you intimidating her with your size. And yes, you also see her defending herself. And your little tantrum after she embarrassed you, all caught on camera." Gary looked like he was about to explode, but Mrs. Hayes didn't give him a chance. She stood up, hands planted firmly on the desk, and looked him in the eyes. "I've had enough of this. You're a grown man. You shouldn't be acting like this. Bullying kids, manipulating the truth. It ends now." Gary was silent for a moment, and I could see his mind racing. I knew he was trying to come up with some sort of excuse or way to wriggle out of this. But this time, there was nothing he could do. "You can't do this," he finally shouted, standing up so fast that his chair nearly tipped over. "I demand justice. I have rights. You can't just—" "Gary," Mrs. Hayes interrupted, her voice sharper now. "You've lost your privileges here. I'm giving you one more chance to walk out of this office with your dignity. Leave, now." For a second, Gary stood frozen, looking like he was going to argue some more. But then, like a balloon losing air, his anger seemed to deflate. With a grunt of frustration, he snatched up his coat and stormed out of the office, muttering to himself as he went. The door slammed behind him. I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The tension in the room melted away, and for the first time all day, I felt like I could finally relax. Gary was gone, and the best part, he wasn't coming back. Mrs. Hayes sat back down, rubbing her temples. "I'm so sorry you had to deal with this, really," she said, giving me an apologetic smile. "But I'm glad you stood your ground. I'm afraid Gary's behavior has been less than ideal around here. It's been going on for far too long." I shrugged, feeling a little lighter now that it was over. Honestly, I didn't expect it to get this far, but you have to do what you have to do, right? "Exactly," Mrs. Hayes said, nodding. "We'll be keeping a close eye on things, and I'll make sure Gary doesn't come back to school until he's had a serious conversation about his behavior." I stood up, ready to leave. "Thank you, Mrs. Hayes, I appreciate it, but just so we're clear, if he tries anything else, I'll be right here. I'm not backing down." She smiled, clearly relieved. "I know you won't, you've made that very clear." As I walked out of her office, I felt lighter than I had in days. It was over. Gary had lost. The bully had finally been put in his place, and no amount of manipulation or false accusations could change that. It wasn't just a victory for me. It was a victory for my daughter, and for every kid who'd ever been pushed around by someone who thought they were untouchable. I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text to Lucy. "It's over. He's gone." She replied almost instantly, "Thanks, Mom, you're the best." It was the sweetest message I could have gotten. Not because it was a compliment, but because it meant she was okay. Because she knew she didn't have to face bullies alone anymore. And as her mother, that's all I could ever ask for. I could breathe now. I had done what I came here to do. The next few days after Gary's dramatic exit from the school were almost peaceful. Almost. I figured that after all the chaos, things would settle down. I imagined Gary would sulk off somewhere, licking his wounds, and I'd never have to deal with him again. Maybe he'd learn a lesson about how bullying and intimidating people doesn't work. I hoped that for his sake, he'd just stay out of our lives. But of course, I should have known better. The calm never lasts. One afternoon, I was sitting at home, going through some paperwork on the couch while Lucy was in her room doing homework. Life felt relatively normal again. I'd even gotten a few calls from friends and family, congratulating me for standing up to Gary. Everyone was proud of me, and truth be told, I was proud of myself too. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that Gary wasn't done yet. People like him don't just disappear. They always find a way to come back. And sure enough, I was right. It started with a knock at the door. The kind of knock that sounds way too official, like something about to go terribly wrong. I stood up, my instincts kicking in, and opened the door to find a man in a suit. His expression was serious, and he wasn't holding a pizza or any kind of cheerful delivery. No, this man had an envelope in his hand, the kind of envelope that screams legal trouble. "Are you Mrs. Maxwell?" he asked, and I could already hear the words I didn't want to hear coming out of his mouth. "I am. Can I help you?" I tried to sound calm, but I could feel my stomach tighten. I knew exactly what this was about. The man didn't waste time. "This is a formal notice of a lawsuit. You are being sued for defamation, harassment, and assault. The claimant is Gary Henson." I blinked hard. I thought I'd misheard him. There's no way. Gary was suing me for what? "I'm sorry, what?" I asked, even though I knew exactly what he'd said. My brain just needed a moment to catch up. "You are being sued by Gary Henson," he repeated. "He claims that your actions have caused him emotional distress and defamation of character." I felt the words hit me like a punch in the gut. Sued. Gary was suing me? After everything, I couldn't wrap my head around it. He had already tried to make himself the victim in front of Mrs. Hayes, and now he was escalating it. This wasn't just a petty complaint. This was serious. The man handed me the envelope, his expression unchanged. "You have 15 days to respond. I suggest you seek legal counsel." I stared at the envelope in my hand. It was heavy. It was real. I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me. I wanted to throw it in the trash to pretend it was some kind of sick joke. But I couldn't. This was happening. Gary wasn't just going to slink away with his tail between his legs. No, he was going to drag me through this, make me fight for every inch. "Thanks," I said, my voice sharp. "I'll take care of it." He nodded curtly and turned to leave. As he walked away, I stood frozen at the door, the envelope still clutched in my hand. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something. How could this be happening? After a moment, I went inside, sat down on the couch, and tore open the envelope. The words were as harsh as they sounded. Gary was suing me for everything he could think of: emotional distress, defamation, even claiming I physically assaulted him. The nerve, the audacity. I wanted to laugh, but all I could feel was anger rising in my chest. I knew this wasn't just about the lunch tray. It wasn't even about me defending my daughter. No, this was about Gary trying to save face, trying to make me pay for embarrassing him. The fact that he thought this would work only made me angrier. He had to think he could intimidate me into backing down. But that wasn't going to happen. I was fuming. There was no way I was letting this man win. If he thought he could bully me out of defending myself, he was sorely mistaken. I would fight this tooth and nail. He wasn't getting away with it. I grabbed my phone and called the first lawyer I could think of, a family friend who had helped me with some minor legal matters in the past. The moment I explained the situation, he told me not to worry, that he'd handle it. But even as I heard his reassuring words, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. After I hung up with the lawyer, I walked into Lucy's room. She was sitting at her desk, buried in a pile of textbooks and papers, her pencil tapping the desk in concentration. She looked up as I walked in, her eyes immediately noticing the change in my mood. "Mom, what's wrong?" she asked, setting her pencil down. I took a deep breath, then slowly handed her the envelope. She stared at it for a moment, her brow furrowing. "Is this?" "Yeah," I said, sitting on her bed. "Gary is suing me." She blinked like she couldn't quite process it. "For what?" "For standing up to him." I nodded, feeling both frustrated and defeated. "Yeah, he's claiming that I caused him emotional distress, that I ruined his reputation, and he's saying I assaulted him with that lunch tray." Lucy's eyes widened in disbelief. "What? But you didn't. He was the one who—" "I know," I interrupted, my voice growing louder. "But apparently that doesn't matter to him. He's trying to make it seem like I did something wrong." "Mom, that's insane. You didn't do anything wrong." Lucy's voice was full of anger now, and it made me smile a little. "I know, but it doesn't matter what's true. It's about what he can make people believe. And right now, he's trying to turn the whole story around to make it look like I'm the bad guy." She sat up on her bed, her arms crossed. "This is so unfair. He's just mad because he lost, right? He wants revenge. This isn't even about you anymore. It's about him saving his ego." "Exactly," I said, rubbing my forehead. "But that doesn't make it any less real. I'm still going to have to fight this, and it's going to be a battle." I knew Lucy was worried. I could see it in her eyes, and I didn't blame her. This wasn't just some petty dispute anymore. This was going to get ugly, and she was going to be right in the middle of it. But I wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. "I'll figure this out," I said, trying to sound calm, even though everything inside me was screaming. "We'll get through it, I promise." Lucy didn't say anything at first. She just hugged me tight like she was trying to take some of the weight off my shoulders. For a moment, I let myself relax into her embrace. She was right. This was unfair. This was ridiculous, but we had each other, and that was what mattered. "I'm proud of you, Mom," she whispered. I pulled away, wiping a tear from my cheek. "Thanks, sweetie, but this isn't over yet." And I meant it. Gary had poked the wrong bear, and now he was going to regret it. This wasn't about who had the most power or the loudest voice. It was about standing up for what's right, even when everything seemed stacked against you. Gary thought he could intimidate me. He thought he could ruin my life with a lawsuit. But he was wrong, because I wasn't about to let him win. Not this time. The days after the lawsuit notice felt like I was walking through thick mud. The weight of it was unbearable. Every time I picked up my phone or looked at my mailbox, I half expected another letter, another notice, or another phone call from Gary or his lawyers. The constant feeling of being on edge started to wear me down, but I couldn't afford to let it take over. Not now. Not when Lucy was counting on me to keep it together. I spent the next few days talking with the lawyer. We went over the details of the case, examined everything from Gary's false claims to the footage that Mrs. Hayes had. There were a lot of legal terms that I didn't fully understand, but the one thing I did get was that Gary didn't have much of a leg to stand on. His claims of emotional distress were ridiculous, especially when you consider the evidence that clearly showed who the real bully was. But even so, the fact that he was dragging me into this mess made me furious. Lucy, for her part, was trying to stay strong. She didn't want to talk about it too much, didn't want to add more stress to the already tense situation. But I knew it bothered her. She hated seeing her mom caught up in something so ridiculous, and I hated that I couldn't shield her from it. One afternoon after school, I was sitting on the porch, staring out at the yard and trying to breathe through the frustration. I was thinking about everything: Gary's lawsuit, the courtroom drama ahead, and how it was affecting my family. Suddenly my phone buzzed, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was a text from Mrs. Hayes. "Gary has been removed from the HOA board. I wanted to let you know in case it gives you some peace of mind. The community is tired of his antics." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. For the first time in days, something felt right. Gary might have been trying to make my life miserable, but the people around him were finally starting to see him for what he was: a bully with too much power and too little common sense. I texted her back a quick thank you, feeling a little lighter. That evening, I sat down at the kitchen table with Lucy, who was poking at her dinner like she was lost in thought. "How was school today?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Okay," she mumbled, not really looking at me. I could tell she was still thinking about Gary, probably still feeling the weight of the whole situation. "You know, you can talk to me about anything, right? If you're feeling upset or worried." "I know, Mom," she said quietly. She looked up, her eyes tired. "It's just I don't know, I don't want to keep thinking about him. I just want it to be over." I reached across the table and put my hand on hers. "I get it. I want it over too, but we'll get through it. I promise you, Lucy, I'm not going to let him win." She gave me a small smile, and we continued with our meal. I could feel the tension easing between us, even if just for a moment. Later that night, after I tucked Lucy into bed, I went into the living room and sat down with a glass of wine. I wasn't the type to drink often, but tonight I needed it. The last few days had been nothing short of a roller coaster, and I needed a break. I could hear the crickets outside and feel the cool breeze coming through the window. It was peaceful, and for a few minutes I allowed myself to just breathe. The phone rang, pulling me out of my thoughts. I checked the caller ID. It was my lawyer. I took a deep breath before answering. "Hello." "Mrs. Maxwell, I have some good news," my lawyer said, his voice calm but upbeat. "We've gone over the details of the case, and it's clear that Gary's claims are baseless. We've already gathered enough evidence to dismiss his lawsuit." A wave of relief washed over me. I had been so wrapped up in the stress of it all that I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear those words. "You're saying this is going to be over soon?" I asked, trying not to sound too hopeful but failing miserably. "Soon," he said. "We'll file the necessary motions to dismiss the case, and with the evidence we have, there's no way Gary will win. I'm confident about it." I felt my whole body relax for the first time in days. It wasn't over yet, but it was a huge step in the right direction. "Thank you," I said, feeling a smile tug at my lips. "I really appreciate all your help." "No problem at all. We'll keep you updated. Just keep doing what you've been doing. Don't let him intimidate you." After we hung up, I felt lighter. There was a victory on the horizon. Gary might have tried to drag me into a fight, but I wasn't backing down. And now it looked like he was going to lose. The next few days were quieter, and I did my best to keep things normal for Lucy. We spent time together, went to the park, and even watched a few movies. I didn't talk much about the lawsuit around her. She didn't need to hear about it anymore. It wasn't easy, but we made it through. Every day felt a little better. The weight on my shoulders was lifting, even if just a little. Then one afternoon, about a week later, we got the letter. It was from my lawyer, and it came with a thick stack of documents. My heart raced as I opened it, unsure of what to expect. But as I started reading, I couldn't help the grin that spread across my face. The lawsuit was officially dismissed. Gary's case was thrown out. All the evidence that had been collected, the footage, the witness statements, the reports from the school, had made it clear that Gary's claims were not only false but completely ridiculous. For the first time in a long time, I felt the weight of the last few weeks lift off my chest. I read the letter a few more times just to make sure I wasn't dreaming, but it was real. It was finally over. Gary had lost. I called Lucy into the living room. "Sweetie, you won't believe it," I said, my voice shaking with excitement. "We won. The lawsuit is over. It's all been dismissed." Lucy's eyes went wide as she came over to where I was standing. "Wait, really? We won?" "We won," I said, barely able to believe it myself. "They threw out the case. Gary's lawsuit is done." Her face broke into a huge smile, and I felt my heart swell with pride. For all the stress and anger we'd been through, this moment made it all worth it. It wasn't just about the win. It was about standing up for what was right, not letting a bully get away with destroying your peace of mind. "I'm so glad this is over," she said, jumping into my arms for a hug. "I am too, kiddo," I said, hugging her back. "I am too." Later that night, after we'd celebrated a little and I'd tucked Lucy into bed, I sat down on the porch again. The night air was cool, the stars were out, and the quiet was comforting. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in weeks. It was done. Gary had tried to break me to take my family down with him, but he had underestimated one thing. He had underestimated my strength. And now, he was nothing more than a memory, a brief obstacle in the rearview mirror. Lucy and I had made it through. We were stronger and we had each other. And that was enough. The days after the lawsuit was dismissed felt like a slow exhale, a long breath that I hadn't realized I was holding. The pressure had finally lifted and I could breathe again, fully and deeply. I kept replaying that moment when I got the call that everything was over. It was hard to believe. After all the stress, the court dates, the sleepless nights, it was finally done. But more than the relief of winning, there was something else I felt, a quiet pride that simmered beneath the surface. I had done it. And more importantly, Lucy had seen me do it. I remember a few days after the news had settled in, sitting at the kitchen table, my coffee in hand, watching Lucy as she read through her schoolwork. She was different now. There was something in her that had shifted, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. She wasn't the same girl who had been worried about being caught in the middle of all that mess. She was stronger. She had seen firsthand what it meant to stand up for yourself, to fight for what was right, no matter how hard or scary it seemed. "Mom," she said, breaking me out of my thoughts. I looked up from my coffee, startled for a second before I smiled. "What's up?" She hesitated for a moment before speaking, her voice a little shy but full of conviction. I wanted to say thank you for everything." My heart did that thing where it skipped a beat. "You don't have to thank me, sweetie. I did what any mom would do." She shook her head, setting her pencil down and looking me in the eye. "No, it's more than that. I didn't realize how much it takes to fight like that. You didn't just protect me. You showed me how to stand up for myself. You didn't back down even when it got hard." I swallowed hard. The lump in my throat caught me off guard. This wasn't the first time Lucy had shown maturity beyond her years, but hearing her say this made it feel real. She wasn't just my daughter anymore. She was someone who had learned, through everything, what real courage looked like. "I'm proud of you," I said, my voice thick. "But don't forget, you taught me something too. You showed me how strong you are through all of this." We shared a quiet moment before she stood up, stretching. "Anyway, I just wanted you to know that. I think you're the strongest person I know." The words hung in the air, heavier than they should have been, and for a moment neither of us spoke. I let them sink in, appreciating every syllable. She was right, though. Standing up to Gary had taken more than just courage, it had taken something deeper. It had required me to dig deep, to look at myself and say, I'm not going to let fear win. That lesson wasn't just about Gary, it was about life, about how we face the obstacles that come our way and how we react to them. The next few weeks passed quietly. There were no more lawsuits, no more threats, and no more drama. It felt almost too good to be true. My routine was starting to get back to normal. Lucy and I spent our evenings cooking together, watching old movies and joking around like we always had. But every now and then, I'd catch myself thinking about Gary, about how much power he had tried to wield over us, how close he had come to breaking our spirits. It made me angry all over again. But more than that, it made me proud of the way we fought back. And then one Saturday afternoon, I got a call. It wasn't from my lawyer or anyone connected to the case. It was from someone I hadn't heard from in a while, Mrs. Hayes, the school principal. I picked up the phone, a bit surprised. "Hello." "Hi, Mrs. Maxwell, it's Mrs. Hayes. I hope you're doing well. I just wanted to let you know something." "Of course," I said, my curiosity piqued. "What's going on?" "Well, I don't know if you've heard yet, but Gary is no longer a member of the HOA board. The community finally took a stand against him. It's been a long time coming, but I wanted to share that with you. It's a small victory for everyone, really. I couldn't stop the smile from spreading across my face. You're telling me that Gary's gone for good? Yes, she said, her voice full of satisfaction. He was removed, and it's a huge relief for everyone. The community is a lot better off without him. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It felt so sweet, knowing that Gary's reign of terror had come to an end. He had tried to break me, to use his position to manipulate and intimidate. But in the end, the community saw him for what he was, and they chose to take a stand. That's fantastic, I said, shaking my head in disbelief. It's hard to believe it's actually over. It is, she agreed. But more than that, I think it shows how powerful standing up for what's right can be. You set an example for your daughter, for the community. People are stronger when they stand together. I didn't know what to say to that. I was still processing everything, the lawsuit, the victory, and how it had all come together. But as I sat there listening to Mrs. Hayes, it hit me. This wasn't just about Gary. This wasn't even just about me and Lucy. This was about something bigger, about teaching everyone that it's okay to fight for what's right. You're right, I said finally. I guess in the end it's about more than just one person. It's about all of us. I spent the next few days reflecting on everything that had happened. I thought about all the people who had helped along the way, Mrs. Hayes, my lawyer, and even the kids at school who had witnessed what Gary had tried to do. I thought about how easy it would have been to just give up, to let Gary win. But I hadn't. We hadn't. And that was something that I would never forget. One evening, I found myself in the backyard with Lucy. We were sitting on the porch swing, watching the sunset together. The sky was that perfect shade of orange and pink, and for a moment, it felt like the world had slowed down. Mom, Lucy asked, her voice soft, do you think things will always be like this? Like what? I asked, looking over at her. You know, peaceful, like we don't have to worry about people trying to bring us down. I smiled, pushing back the hair that had fallen over her eyes. I hope so, kiddo, but even if things get tough again, we've learned something. We've learned that we're strong, and as long as we stick together, there's nothing we can't handle. She smiled back at me, and for a brief moment, everything felt perfect. The last few months had been chaotic, to say the least, but in the end, we were better for it. We were stronger, braver, and more resilient than we had ever been before. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about what Mrs. Hayes had said. I had set an example, not just for my daughter, but for anyone who might have been watching. I wasn't some superhero. I didn't have special powers. But I had something just as powerful, the strength to stand up for what was right, no matter how hard it was. And that, I realized, was what truly mattered. Lucy had learned the most important lesson of all. That strength doesn't always come from the things you can see. It comes from within. From the way you stand tall when the world tries to knock you down. From the choices you make when everything seems impossible. In the end, we hadn't just fought against Gary. We had fought for each other, and that was a fight worth winning.